My daughter sold my wedding ring. Without asking, so I sold her engagement ring. Subscribe to the channel and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Margaret Wilson's hands trembled as she opened the small velvet box hidden at the back of her dresser drawer. Inside lay her most treasured possession, a platinum wedding band inlaid with tiny diamonds that caught the afternoon light filtering through her bedroom window. She slipped it onto her finger, the weight of it as familiar as the memories it carried. "I miss you, Robert," she whispered, running her thumb over the inscription inside. "Forever yours, R&M, 1984-2009. At 58, Margaret lived alone in her modest Boston home, surrounded by photographs that chronicled a life built on sacrifice and love. Her husband had been gone 15 years now, taken by cancer that ravaged his body but never his spirit. The phone on her nightstand lit up with a notification, breaking her reverie. A text from Sophia, her only daughter. "Coming to visit this weekend. Have news. Need to talk about finances." Margaret sighed, slipping the ring back into its box. These communications had become rare and always seemed to revolve around money. Sophia was 29 now, completing her final year of cardiothoracic surgery residency in Chicago, a dream made possible by Margaret's decades of double shifts at Boston General, the public hospital where she'd worked as a nurse until retirement 2 years ago. She walked to the living room, stopping at the photograph that always made her heart ache. 14-year-old Sophia sitting beside Robert's hospital bed, holding his hand as chemotherapy drugs dripped into his veins. They were both smiling despite everything, their identical hazel eyes, Robert's eyes, crinkled at the corners. "She's going to make it, Maggie," Robert had told her that night after Sophia had fallen asleep in the chair. "I've set aside money for her education. No matter what happens to me, she'll have what she needs to become a doctor." The memory dissolved as Margaret pulled out her checkbook, examining the balance with a heaviness in her chest. Her pension covered the basics, and she had her modest savings, $35,000 she'd meticulously accumulated over the years, intended to be her safety net. But if Sophia needed help, when Robert died, he had indeed left a substantial educational trust for Sophia. But the details were complex. Once Sophia turned 18, she had assumed full control of the trust, as stipulated in Robert's will, effectively shutting Margaret out from any oversight of the funds. Margaret had respected this arrangement, believing it represented Robert's faith in their daughter's responsibility. The doorbell rang at precisely 6 o'clock Saturday evening. Margaret smoothed her best blouse and opened the door to find not just Sophia, but a tall, handsome man with kind eyes and an expensive watch. "Mom, this is Thomas," Sophia said without embracing her mother. "My fiancé." Margaret's surprise must have shown on her face because Sophia added with a hint of impatience, "I told you I had news." "It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Wilson." Thomas extended his hand. "Sophia has told me so much about you." Over dinner in Margaret's carefully cleaned dining room, the true purpose of the visit emerged. Sophia described elaborate wedding plans at the Campbell family estate, detailing costs that made Margaret's stomach clench. "We'll need your contribution, of course," Sophia stated, her eyes fixed on her plate rather than her mother's face. "It's customary for the bride's family to help." "What about your father's education fund?" Margaret asked gently. "Is there anything—" "That's for my career," Sophia cut her off. "This is different." Later, as Thomas helped with dishes, he whispered when Sophia stepped away, "I'm sorry about this. The residency hours, they're taking a toll on her." Margaret nodded, but the knot in her stomach tightened. As she watched them drive away, she realized her daughter hadn't asked a single question about her life. The bridal boutique's crystal chandeliers cast prismatic reflections across the mirrored walls. Margaret sat on a velvet settee, her sensible shoes and department store dress making her feel invisible among Sophia's friends in their designer outfits. "What about this one, Mrs. Wilson?" asked the saleswoman, displaying a gown with a modest price tag. Before Margaret could respond, Sophia emerged from the dressing room in a different dress, an extravagant creation with hand-sewn pearls and a cathedral train. "Mom doesn't really understand quality," Sophia said with a tight smile. "This is the one I want." The saleswoman's eyes flickered between mother and daughter. "It's quite exclusive. Only 3 were made." "And the price?" Margaret asked. $22,000, the woman replied quietly. Sophia's friends exchanged glances. One whispered something that made the others giggle. Margaret's cheeks burned. "I've given you the check already," Margaret said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But Thomas's parents are covering most of it," Sophia interrupted. "I just need you to handle the alterations and accessories." She turned to her friends. "Mom's been very frugal since Dad died." The words hung in the air like something rotten. Margaret stared at her daughter, this stranger who wore Sophia's face but spoke with a voice she didn't recognize. Later, in the parking lot, Margaret found herself alone with one of Sophia's friends, a slender woman named Claire, who'd been quieter than the others. "She wasn't always like this," Claire said suddenly, lighting a cigarette. "In medical school, she talked about you constantly, how hard you worked to put her through school. Something changed during residency." Margaret's hands tightened on her purse strap. "The hours are difficult, I'm sure." Claire blew out a stream of smoke. "It's not the hours. It's the company she keeps now. The Campbells move in exclusive circles." Before Margaret could respond, Sophia emerged from the boutique, waving Claire over. Margaret watched them walk away, laughing about something she couldn't hear. That night, Margaret found the check she'd written cleared from her account, $35,000, her entire liquid savings. She'd have to dip into her home equity if any emergency arose now. Scrolling through her phone, she found fewer and fewer messages from Sophia over the past years, nearly all of them mentioning money or asking for favors. She clicked on a photo album labeled Sophia, Med School Graduation, and found herself staring at a picture of her daughter accepting her diploma. Margaret had been so proud that day, sitting alone in the audience, imagining Robert beside her. In the photo, Sophia was looking past the camera, not at her mother who'd taken the picture. Margaret closed the album and opened her email, finding a wedding planning schedule Sophia had sent. Next to Mother-Daughter Brunch was a note. "Low priority. Can cancel if time constraints." The knot in Margaret's stomach twisted tighter. She thought back to when Sophia turned 18 and had taken over managing the educational trust Robert had established. Margaret had offered to help, but Sophia had insisted on handling it herself. "Dad wanted me to learn financial responsibility," she'd said. Margaret had respected her wishes, never realizing this would create such distance between them. "And this is Mom's house," Sophia said, her voice carrying an apologetic note as she led Thomas's parents through the front door. "It's very retro." Margaret wiped her hands on her apron, the aroma of her special pot roast, Sophia's childhood favorite, filling the small living room. She'd spent the entire previous day cleaning, even repainting the guest bathroom. "It's charming," said Eleanor Campbell, elegant in cream linen despite the summer heat. Her husband Richard, a distinguished-looking man with silver temples, nodded in agreement. "Been in the neighborhood long?" he asked Margaret kindly. 30 years, Margaret smiled. "Robert and I bought it when Sophia was just a baby." "Mom refuses to move somewhere more practical," Sophia interjected. "I keep telling her nobody lives in houses like this anymore." Margaret's smile froze. "The dining room is this way." Over lunch, the conversation flowed more easily than Margaret had feared. The Campbells asked thoughtful questions about her nursing career, seeming genuinely interested in her stories from Boston General. "Thomas tells us you worked in pediatric oncology," Eleanor said. "That must have been incredibly challenging." "And rewarding," Margaret replied. "The children taught me more about courage than I could ever—" "Mom only worked at a public hospital," Sophia interrupted. "Nothing like your private practice." Richard Campbell's eyebrows rose slightly. "Some of the best medicine happens in public hospitals. Limited resources breed innovation." Sophia shifted the conversation to wedding plans, describing the guest list full of distinguished names. When Eleanor asked about Robert, Margaret opened her mouth to share a memory, but Sophia spoke first. "Dad died when I was 14. I barely remember him." The fork in Margaret's hand clattered against her plate. The room seemed to tilt momentarily as she registered the casual cruelty of the lie. Robert had been Sophia's hero. She'd spent every possible moment at his hospital bedside during his illness, reading to him from medical textbooks, determined to become a doctor who could save people like him. Margaret caught the calculating look in Sophia's eyes as she delivered the lie. This wasn't a slip of memory. It was deliberate reinvention, creating a narrative that would better fit her new social circle. The realization sent ice through Margaret's veins. "Excuse me," Margaret managed, rising shakily. "I'll get dessert." In the kitchen, she gripped the counter, breathing deeply to compose herself. The door swung open, and Eleanor entered, carrying a stack of plates. "Let me help," she said, placing them beside the sink. Then, more quietly, "My son speaks very highly of you, Margaret. He says Sophia wouldn't be where she is without your sacrifices." Margaret's eyes welled with tears she refused to shed. "Thank you." "Thomas is concerned," Eleanor continued carefully, "about certain patterns he's noticing." Before she could elaborate, Sophia pushed through the door. "Mom, the Campbells need to leave soon for their dinner reservation." As they departed, Richard clasped Margaret's hand warmly. "We'll see more of each other soon, I hope." Watching them drive away, Margaret noticed Thomas turn back, his expression troubled as he watched Sophia laughing at something on her phone. The daughter who had just denied her deep bond with her father, rewriting history to impress her future in-laws. That night, Margaret found an old journal in her nightstand. The entry from the day after Robert's funeral read, "Sophia said today she'll become a doctor who saves people from cancer. She has her father's determination. I will do anything to help her achieve this dream." The words blurred as tears finally fell. "The florist recommended white peonies for the centerpieces," Margaret suggested, pointing to a page in the wedding planner's portfolio. "They're elegant but not as expensive as—" "Already decided on imported orchids," Sophia said without looking up from her phone. The peonies looked cheap. They sat in the sunroom of the Campbell estate, surrounded by pristine gardens visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. The wedding planner, a slim woman with a perpetual smile, nodded as if Margaret hadn't spoken. "And for the ceremony backdrop?" the planner asked Sophia. "I thought maybe some roses from my garden," Margaret ventured. "The yellow ones that Robert planted. They're blooming beautifully this year and would be a lovely way to include—" Sophia's laugh cut through the air like breaking glass. "Flowers from your yard? This isn't a backyard barbecue, Mom. We're talking about an event at Campbell Estate." The planner smiled nervously. "Garden flowers can be charming for casual weddings." "Mom still doesn't understand the level of event we're planning," Sophia said, her voice dripping with condescension. Margaret noticed Thomas frowning at his fiancée from across the room where he'd been reviewing contracts. His eyes met Margaret's briefly, apology evident in them, but he said nothing. Later, as they walked to their cars, Margaret overheard Thomas confronting Sophia. "You didn't need to speak to your mother that way. She was only trying to help." "You don't understand," Sophia snapped. "If I give her an inch, she'll take over everything. Trust me, I know my mother." Thomas's sigh carried across the parking lot. "That's not what I'm seeing, Soph." Margaret slipped into her car before they noticed her, heart hammering in her chest. The drive home passed in a blur of conflicting emotions, hurt, confusion, and a growing anger she didn't know how to process. At home, she pulled out albums from Sophia's childhood. There was Sophia at 10, proudly displaying the science fair ribbon Margaret had stayed up all night helping her earn. Sophia at 16, in her hospital volunteer uniform, following in her mother's footsteps. What had happened to that girl? The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. It was Dr. Patel, her former colleague from Boston General. "Margaret, I've been trying to reach you. Did Sophia tell you about the Nursing Excellence Award the hospital is establishing? They've been looking for outstanding nurses to recognize. And your name came up immediately." "No, she never mentioned it," Margaret's voice faltered. A pause. "That's odd. She was copied on all the emails when they contacted her about getting your information. We need your resume and accomplishments by next week if you'd like to be considered." After hanging up, Margaret sat motionless, staring at the wall. Sophia had deliberately kept this from her, a potential recognition of her 30-year career, hidden like something shameful. The doorbell interrupted her thoughts. It was the FedEx driver with a package requiring signature. Inside was a small box containing wedding favor samples, with a note from the planner. "Mrs. Wilson, as requested by Sophia, sending these for your review. Please notify of any allergy concerns among your family guests." Margaret stared at the expensive little boxes of imported chocolates. It was the first time Sophia had included her in any decision, even one as minor as checking for allergies. Was it possible that somewhere beneath the cruel facade, her daughter still cared what she thought? She picked up the phone to call and thank her, but stopped when she saw Sophia's latest Instagram post, a selfie with friends at an exclusive restaurant. Caption reading, "Final fitting done, 24 days until I leave Wilson behind and become a Campbell." The phone slipped from Margaret's fingers as the meaning registered. Sophia wasn't just marrying into the Campbell family. She was erasing the Wilson name, erasing Robert, erasing her. Margaret returned from the grocery store, arms laden with bags. Setting them on the kitchen counter, she noticed something odd, a subtle shift in the air of her home, as if someone had been there. She moved through the rooms cautiously until she reached her bedroom. The closet door stood slightly ajar. Heart racing, she pushed it open and saw immediately. The small safe in the back corner was unlocked, its door cracked open. She dropped to her knees, yanking it wide. The velvet box was there, but empty. Her wedding ring, the last gift Robert had given her before he died, was gone. Margaret's legs gave way, and she sat heavily on the floor, breath coming in short gasps. The combination to the safe was Sophia's birthday, 0517, had been for decades. The implication was unmistakable. With shaking hands, she dialed Sophia's number. Voicemail. She called again and again. She left increasingly desperate messages. Sophia, call me immediately. Sophia, something's missing from my safe. Finally, Sophia, please tell me you didn't take my wedding ring. Hours later, her doorbell rang. Sophia stood on the porch, dressed in designer clothes Margaret had never seen, shopping bags dangling from her wrists. What's the emergency? She asked, brushing past her mother. Margaret closed the door softly. My wedding ring is gone. Sophia's face remained impassive. Yes, I took it. The simple admission, delivered without emotion, hit Margaret like a physical blow. You took it? Why? I sold it. Sophia shrugged, setting her bags on the couch. Got $7,000 for it, needed some extra things for the wedding. You sold? Margaret couldn't finish the sentence. Sophia, that was my wedding ring. The last thing your father gave me before. It's just an old piece of metal, Sophia interrupted. Dad's been dead for years. Why keep it? Besides, I used my birthday as the safe combination, like always. I figured that was your way of saying you wouldn't mind. Margaret stared at her daughter, this person wearing Sophia's face, but speaking words that couldn't possibly come from the child she'd raised. How could you think I wouldn't mind? That ring was everything to me. Everything? Sophia's voice took on a cruel edge. You act like Dad was perfect. I remember the fights too, you know. Something broke inside Margaret then, a dam holding back years of suppressed rage and pain. Get out! Mom! Get out of my house! The scream tore from her throat, primal and raw. Sophia's eyes widened in shock before narrowing again. Fine. Call me when you're being reasonable. After she left, Margaret collapsed onto the floor, sobs racking her body. Her fingers went instinctively to her empty ring finger. The phantom weight of the band, a reminder of all she'd lost, not just Robert, but now the daughter they'd loved so completely. Through her tears, Margaret's gaze fell on the shopping bags Sophia had left behind. Designer clothes with tags still attached, purchased with the money from her wedding ring. A receipt peeked out from one bag, $3,800 for a purse. Her ring, 25 years of love, reduced to an accessory. Margaret's sobs gradually subsided, replaced by a stillness unlike anything she'd felt before. She rose from the floor and walked to her dresser, staring at her reflection. The woman who looked back had changed. Her eyes, still wet with tears, now held something new. Resolve. Enough, she whispered to herself. Enough. 3 days of silence followed. Margaret's calls went unanswered, her texts unread. She moved through her house like a ghost, touching Robert's photographs, wondering where she'd gone wrong with their daughter. The knock at her door on the 4th day startled her. It wasn't Sophia's impatient rap, but something more hesitant. Thomas stood on her porch holding a paper bag. I brought coffee, he said, awkwardness evident in his stance. And those almond croissants from the bakery on Newbury Street? Margaret let him in, surprised by the gesture. They sat at her kitchen table, steam rising from paper cups between them. I'm sorry about the ring, Thomas began. I had no idea until yesterday. Margaret nodded, unsure what to say. There's something else you should know, he continued, fingers fidgeting with his cup. Something I thought you were aware of, but now I realize you weren't. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to find something. Robert left Sophia extremely well provided for. The educational trust he established before his death was substantial, nearly $300,000, which has grown significantly over the years. Margaret's cup froze halfway to her lips. What? All her essential expenses, tuition, books, housing, were covered by the trust. There was even money left over. He looked up, his expression pained. The money she's been asking from you all these years. Was for what? Margaret whispered, Luxury items, weekend trips to the Hamptons with friends from wealthy families, designer clothes. He ran a hand through his hair. I thought you knew this. She told me you insisted on helping despite not having much yourself. Margaret set her cup down carefully, afraid she might drop it. She told me the trust barely covered tuition, that she needed help with rent, with books. Thomas's face crumpled. I'm so sorry. She lied to both of us. Both of us? She told me you were difficult, controlling, that you resented her success because your nursing career had peaked early. He looked genuinely distressed. But when I met you, nothing added up. You're exactly the opposite of how she described you. Margaret's mind raced, piecing together years of manipulation. Why are you telling me this now? Because I love her, he said simply. But I don't like who she's becoming. The way she treated you at the florist's, the comments about your home, that's not the woman I fell in love with. He hesitated before continuing. There's more. At dinners with my parents' friends, she tells stories about you. How you'll believe any sob story she invents. She laughs about it. Margaret felt as if the floor were tilting beneath her. She gripped the table edge. I didn't know, Thomas said miserably. I swear I didn't know how bad it was until the ring incident. My mother suspected. She tried to warn me after that lunch here, but I didn't want to believe it. Thomas revealed another troubling detail. When Sophia turned 18, she took complete control of the trust fund, as Robert's will allowed. She actually manipulated the paperwork to remove you as an oversight trustee, telling the bank that you had agreed to step aside. I saw the documents recently. Your signature looks questionable. Margaret's shock deepened. She forged my signature? Thomas nodded grimly. It appears so. The trust was substantial enough that she never actually needed your financial help. Every dollar she took from you was extra. After he left, promising to talk with Sophia, Margaret sat alone in her kitchen for hours. The coffee grew cold. The croissants remained untouched. Her mind churned with revelations, each more painful than the last. That evening, she searched for the business card Dr. Patel had given her years ago. Finding it in an old address book, she dialed the number. Margaret, came the warm voice. Have you decided about the nursing award nomination? Not yet, Margaret replied carefully. But I wanted to ask you something. Was Robert's educational trust for Sophia as substantial as I'm hearing? A pause. He wanted to make absolutely certain she'd be taken care of. The fund would have covered everything, with plenty left over. Didn't you help manage it? No, Margaret said quietly. Sophia took control when she turned 18, completely. The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know. The week crawled by with no contact from Sophia. Margaret returned to a routine altered by new awareness. She examined bank statements from years past, cataloging thousands of dollars sent to her daughter based on desperate-sounding texts. Need help with rent this month. Unexpected book expenses. Medical insurance deductible. All lies. Sunday morning, her doorbell rang. Margaret opened it to find Sophia, perfectly composed in an expensive outfit, holding a gift bag. I thought we should talk, she said, brushing past her mother. I brought you something. Margaret remained standing, arms crossed. I know about the trust fund. Sophia faltered slightly before recovering. What about it? Everything. How much it was worth, what it covered. Margaret kept her voice level with effort. All the money you took from me over the years. You didn't need any of it. I deserve nice things too, Sophia shot back defensively. Everyone in my program came from money. You have no idea what it's like trying to fit in when— So you stole from me? Margaret interrupted. Your own mother? I didn't steal. You offered, because you lied about needing it. Margaret's control slipped. And then you took my wedding ring, the one thing I had left of your father, and sold it for shopping money? Sophia rolled her eyes. You're being dramatic. It's just jewelry. Get out. Mom, don't be ridiculous. I came to make peace. Thomas is upset about this whole thing, and that's why you're here? Because Thomas is upset? Margaret laughed bitterly. Not because what you did was wrong? Sophia sighed theatrically. Fine. I'm sorry about the ring, but what's done is done. She headed toward the bathroom. I need to freshen up before meeting Thomas's parents for dinner. While Sophia showered, Margaret sat in stunned silence, processing her daughter's utter lack of remorse. When Sophia emerged, wrapped in Margaret's good towel, she began applying makeup at the hall mirror. Can I borrow your pearl earrings? She asked casually. They'd look perfect with this outfit. Margaret watched as Sophia placed her engagement ring, a massive diamond that had cost Thomas a small fortune, on the bathroom counter while she applied mascara. The casual arrogance of the gesture, the absolute certainty that her mother would never dare to challenge her, ignited something in Margaret. "Thomas would never believe you against me," Sophia had said once, confident in her power. The memory crystallized Margaret's resolve. After Sophia left for dinner, Margaret picked up the forgotten engagement ring. It sparkled obscenely in her palm, worth far more than her modest home. She slipped it into her pocket and drove to the nearest pawn shop, then another and another. At the fourth establishment, an elderly gentleman examined her wedding ring through a jeweler's loupe. "Beautiful craftsmanship, European 1980s. "Yes," Margaret whispered. "My husband bought it in Italy." "I recognized it immediately," he said. "A young woman sold it to me 3 days ago. I kept it aside. Something felt wrong about the transaction. The inscription inside, it didn't seem like something someone would part with willingly." "It wasn't," Margaret confirmed, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The transaction was completed quickly. Margaret left with her wedding ring back on her finger where it belonged, plus nearly $30,000 in cash, the difference between Sophia's engagement ring's value and what she'd paid to reclaim her own. Driving home, she felt a curious lightness, as if she'd set down a burden she'd carried for years. The weight of her wedding band on her finger felt right, a reminder not just of Robert, but of her own worth. The pounding on her door began at 7:30 the next morning. Margaret opened it to find Sophia livid, face contorted with rage. "Where is it?" she demanded, pushing past Margaret into the house. "Where's my ring?" "Good morning to you too," Margaret replied calmly. "My engagement ring is gone." Sophia's voice rose to a shriek. "Did you take it?" "I know I left it here." "Yes, I took it." The simple admission stopped Sophia cold. "You... what?" "I sold it," Margaret said, echoing her daughter's words from days earlier. "Got a good price, too." "You sold my engagement ring?" Sophia's voice vibrated with disbelief. "That's theft. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Margaret shrugged. "Explain how you stole and sold my wedding ring first. I'm sure they'll be very sympathetic." Sophia fumbled for her phone, then stopped as she noticed something glinting on Margaret's hand. "How did you get that back?" "With the money from your ring," Margaret answered. "I traded one for the other, just like you did." "You can't do that," Sophia exploded. "That ring was worth over $50,000. And this one is worth 25 years of marriage and the last moments I had with your father before he died," Margaret countered. "Which do you think is more valuable?" Sophia launched into a tirade, her voice rising with each accusation. "You're just jealous of me. You've always been jealous. A bitter, lonely old woman who can't stand to see me happy." Margaret absorbed the verbal assault in silence, waiting until Sophia paused for breath. "The difference between us, Sophia, is that I know what love looks like. Your father and I built something real together. What have you built with Thomas except lies? You don't know anything about Thomas and me." "I know he's discovered who you really are," Margaret said quietly. "And I know he's disappointed." Sophia's face contorted. "You've poisoned him against me." "No, Sophia. You did that all by yourself." For a fleeting moment, something like pain flickered across Sophia's face, a glimpse of the daughter Margaret had raised. Then it vanished, replaced by cold fury. "This isn't over," Sophia hissed, snatching up her purse. "You've ruined everything." The door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows. Margaret sank onto the couch, emotional exhaustion washing over her. She'd imagined this confrontation 100 times in the past days, but the reality left her hollow rather than triumphant. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Is everything okay?" Sophia just called in a state. Margaret typed back simply, "We had a necessary conversation. Can I come by later?" came his response. "Yes," she replied, surprising herself. She spent the day in a strange calm, cleaning her already clean house, arranging and rearranging photographs on the mantel. One in particular caught her attention. Sophia at her college graduation, standing between Margaret and Dr. Patel. Her smile in that photo was genuine, proud of her accomplishment, but also grateful. When had that gratitude transformed into entitlement? Thomas arrived at dusk, looking haggard. Sophia told me what happened. "All of it?" Margaret asked, leading him to the kitchen table. "Her version," he answered wearily. "I'd like to hear yours." As she recounted the events without embellishment, Thomas nodded occasionally, his expression growing more troubled. When she finished, he sat in silence for several moments. "I've been blind," he finally said. "Willfully blind. Love does that to us," Margaret replied gently. "What happens now?" he asked, looking lost. Margaret touched her wedding band, feeling Robert's presence stronger than she had in years. "That depends on what kind of person Sophia decides to be." 2 days passed without word from Sophia. Margaret received a formal email from the wedding planner announcing postponement of the ceremony, citing family circumstances. No new date was mentioned. She was deadheading roses in her garden when a sleek black car pulled into her driveway. Richard and Eleanor Campbell emerged, looking somber in casual weekend clothes. "We hope we're not intruding," Eleanor said. "Thomas thought it might be good for us to talk." Margaret invited them in, hastily wiping soil from her hands. "I'm afraid I don't have anything prepared." "Please," Richard interrupted kindly. "This isn't a social call." They settled in her living room. The Campbells perched awkwardly on her worn sofa. Eleanor spoke first. "Thomas told us everything, about the ring, about the trust fund, about how Sophia has been treating you." Her elegant hands twisted in her lap. "We are deeply, deeply sorry." "You have nothing to apologize for," Margaret said. "But we do," Richard insisted. "We raised Thomas to value integrity above all else. He was taught to see the signs of manipulation. We should have intervened sooner when we noticed red flags." "At the lunch here," Eleanor added, "the way she spoke about you, about Robert, I knew something wasn't right. I should have said something directly." Margaret studied these wealthy, powerful people sitting uncomfortably in her modest home. Their genuine distress touched her. "What will happen with the wedding?" she asked finally. Richard cleared his throat. "We've suggested postponement until certain issues are addressed. Primarily, Sophia's willingness to seek professional help." "And how did she take that?" The Campbells exchanged glances. "Not well," Eleanor admitted. "She accused us of taking your side against her." "Thomas is devastated," Richard added, "but determined. He loves her, but he won't move forward until she acknowledges what she's done and commits to change." After they left, promising to keep in touch regardless of what happened between the young couple, Margaret sat in her garden as evening fell. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "We had a long talk. She's agreed to see someone. It's a start." Margaret stared at the message, a complicated mix of emotions swirling within her. Part of her wanted to see Sophia suffer for her actions, but a deeper part, the mother who had held her newborn daughter and promised to love her unconditionally, felt cautious hope. That night, she dreamed of Robert. They were young again, sitting on their small apartment balcony while baby Sophia slept inside. "She'll break your heart someday," Dream Robert said, but he was smiling, strong-willed like her mother. "She'll find her way back," Dream Margaret replied confidently. She woke with tears on her face, but a curious sense of peace in her heart. The next morning brought another text, this time from Sophia. "Can we talk? In person?" Margaret's thumbs hovered over the screen before she typed, "Yes, tomorrow afternoon." The hours until their meeting stretched endlessly. Margaret cleaned, then baked Robert's favorite oatmeal cookies that Sophia had loved as a child, then sat staring at the wall, rehearsing what she might say. When Sophia arrived, she looked different, subdued, with minimal makeup and simple clothes. She stood awkwardly in the entryway, as if unsure of her welcome. "Thomas bought me a new ring," she said, holding up her hand to show a much simpler band. "He said he wanted something that represented values, not price." Margaret nodded, waiting. "The wedding's been postponed," Sophia continued. I'm seeing someone, a therapist." She looked down. "It was that, or lose Thomas? And is that the only reason? To keep Thomas?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know who I am anymore, Mom. I don't recognize myself." It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was something. A crack in the facade, a glimpse of the daughter Margaret had raised. "Come in," Margaret said finally. "I made cookies." The Campbell home buzzed with subdued conversation as caterers moved efficiently through rooms larger than Margaret's entire house. A small dinner party, ostensibly to announce the new wedding date 6 months hence. But Margaret understood its true purpose. This was an intervention, carefully orchestrated by Thomas and his parents. Margaret wore her best dress, a simple navy sheath purchased years ago for a colleague's retirement. Eleanor had offered to take her shopping, but Margaret declined, unwilling to accept charity despite their growing friendship. "You look lovely," Richard greeted her, taking her coat. Sophia and Thomas are in the library with Dr. Winters. Dr. Winters, Sophia's therapist, had suggested this gathering, a controlled environment to address the tensions between families before moving forward with wedding plans. Margaret's stomach knotted with apprehension. In the library, Sophia sat rigidly beside Thomas on a leather sofa. She'd lost weight in the past month, dark circles visible beneath her carefully applied makeup. She nodded at her mother without quite meeting her eyes. "Margaret," Dr. Winters extended her hand. "Thank you for coming. Sophia has been doing important work in our sessions, and she feels ready to take this step." The dinner that followed was painfully polite. Conversation limited to safe topics: hospital renovations, Boston weather, an upcoming charity gala. Over dessert, Thomas cleared his throat, signaling the shift everyone had been anticipating. "I'd like to say something," he began, reaching for Sophia's hand. "The past month has been difficult for all of us, but it's also been clarifying." He looked directly at Margaret. "When I learned what happened with the rings, I was shocked, not just by the action itself, but by what it revealed about patterns I'd been willfully ignoring." Sophia stared at her plate, knuckles white around her fork. "My parents raised me to believe that how you treat those who love you most reveals your true character," Thomas continued. "I've had to confront some hard truths about the woman I fell in love with." Eleanor reached across the table to touch her son's arm, her eyes moist with emotion. "But I've also seen courage," Thomas added, turning to Sophia. "It takes strength to look at yourself honestly, to admit you've been wrong." Dr. Winters nodded encouragingly at Sophia, who finally raised her gaze to meet Margaret's. "I've hurt you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Not just with the ring, but for years. I've been cruel." Margaret's throat tightened, unexpected emotion welling up. "In therapy, I've been trying to understand why," Sophia continued. "Why I resented the mother who sacrificed everything for me. Why I lied about needing money. Why I pretended not to remember Dad." Her voice broke on the last word. "And have you found answers?" Margaret asked softly. "Some," Sophia admitted. "After Dad died, I was so angry. At the cancer, at God, at you for not saving him somehow. That anger, it twisted into something ugly over time." Richard Campbell cleared his throat. "Margaret, our family owes you an apology as well. We should have recognized what was happening sooner." "No one is responsible for Sophia's actions except Sophia," Margaret replied firmly. Eleanor spoke next, her elegant composure momentarily slipping. "When we learned about the wedding ring, what it meant to you, we were deeply disturbed. That's not the kind of family we want our son to marry into." Thomas squeezed Sophia's hand. "But we believe in redemption, in growth. Sophia is working hard to become the person I know she can be. We'd like to offer something," Richard said. "Not as compensation. Nothing could compensate for what happened, but as recognition." He slid an envelope across the table to Margaret. Inside was documentation for a nursing scholarship established at Boston General, the Margaret Wilson Excellence in Nursing Award, with a substantial endowment to support nurses seeking advanced education. "We heard about the award nomination Dr. Patel had mentioned to you," Eleanor explained. "We've worked with the Hospital Foundation to expand it into a full scholarship program that will truly honor your career." Margaret stared at the papers, overcome. "This is too much." "It's not enough," Richard countered, "but it's a start." Later, as the evening wound down, Margaret found herself alone with Sophia in the garden. Stars pricked the clear autumn sky above them, the air crisp with approaching winter. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Sophia said quietly. "Not yet. Forgiveness takes time," Margaret agreed. "And proof. I know." Sophia hesitated. "But I want to try, to be worthy of it someday." Margaret looked at her daughter. Still beautiful, still brilliant, but humbled now in a way that hinted at the possibility of wisdom to come. That's a start, too. The cafe bustled with Sunday morning patrons, conversations and espresso machine hisses creating a comfortable background noise. Margaret stirred her tea, watching Sophia across the small table. These weekly meetings had become their new ritual over the past 2 months, neutral territory for rebuilding what had been broken. "I have something for you," Sophia said, sliding a thick envelope across the table. Margaret opened it cautiously. Inside was a legal document and a check for a substantial amount. "What is this?" "The remaining balance from Dad's educational trust," Sophia explained. "I'm committing to monthly payments on your mortgage for the next 5 years." She hesitated. I know it doesn't make up for what I took from you, but it's not about the money, Sophia. I know. Sophia's hands fidgeted with her napkin. But Dad left that money to secure my future. He'd want me to use it to secure yours too. Margaret studied her daughter's face, thinner than before, with new lines around her eyes, but clearer somehow, more present. How are the therapy sessions going? Hard, Sophia admitted. We've been talking about Dad a lot, about how I twisted my memories of him after he died, made him perfect, then resented him for leaving me with impossibly perfect shoes to fill. Your father wasn't perfect, Margaret said gently. No one is. I know that now. Sophia sipped her coffee. Dr. Winters says I transferred a lot of my anger onto you. It was easier than being angry at him, or at myself. They sat in silence for a moment, the admission hanging between them. The wedding plans are moving forward, Sophia said finally. Small ceremony? Just family and close friends? At the botanical garden where you and Dad got married? Margaret looked up, surprised. How did you know that's where we married? Thomas and I found your wedding album in the attic when we were helping you clean last weekend. Sophia's voice softened. You looked so happy. Both of you. We were. I want that, Sophia said quietly. Not the big show I was planning before. Something real. As they prepared to leave, Sophia asked hesitantly, Would you come to my final dress fitting next week? I chose something different. Simpler. I'd like that, Margaret replied, surprised by the genuineness of her response. Outside, they walked toward their cars, autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. Sophia stopped suddenly. I have to ask you something, she said, her expression serious. Something important. Margaret waited, sensing the weight of the moment. Will you walk me down the aisle? Sophia's voice caught. I know traditionally it's the father, but I think Dad would want it to be you. The request hung in the air between them, fragile and monumental. You don't have to answer now, Sophia added quickly. I know I haven't earned— Yes, Margaret interrupted softly. I would be honored. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, Margaret saw her daughter at 5 years old, at 14, at 20, all the versions of Sophia layered within the woman she was becoming. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Sophia whispered. Maybe not yet, Margaret agreed. But we're both trying. That's what matters. As they parted, Margaret felt Robert's presence stronger than she had in years, not as a ghost or memory, but as a foundation they had built together, a love that had shaped their daughter despite the pain and missteps along the way. That evening, alone in her garden as twilight settled, Margaret twisted her wedding band, feeling its familiar weight. We did our best, she said aloud, imagining Robert could hear. She's finding her way back. The autumn wind rustled through the yellow roses he had planted 15 years ago, still blooming against all odds as October deepened toward winter. Margaret smiled, recognizing the metaphor for what it was, a reminder that some things, once deeply rooted, can weather even the harshest seasons. Spring sunshine filtered through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the botanical garden's small chapel. Margaret stood in the antechamber, adjusting the simple pearl necklace that had been her mother's, something old for Sophia to complement the new dress. Borrowed earrings and blue garter. The door opened, and Sophia entered in her wedding gown, elegant ivory silk, understated and graceful, worlds away from the extravagant creation she'd originally chosen. Her hair was swept into a simple chignon, her makeup subtle enough to reveal the light dusting of freckles across her nose that matched Robert's. You look beautiful, Margaret said, emotion tightening her throat. I feel like myself, Sophia replied, for the first time in a long time. Through the doorway, Margaret could see guests taking their seats, a gathering of perhaps 40 people, intimate and meaningful. The Campbells moved among them. Eleanor's arm linked through Richard's, both beaming with pride. Thomas stood at the altar, nervously adjusting his cuffs, flanked by his brother as best man. I have something for you, Margaret said, retrieving a small box from her purse. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with a single charm, a tiny stethoscope. It was my first graduation gift to myself when I became a nurse, she explained. I thought you might like to wear it today. Doctor and nurse, together. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as Margaret fastened it around her wrist. Mom, I know, Margaret said simply. Me too. The wedding coordinator appeared, signaling it was time. As the first notes of music began, Margaret took her position beside her daughter, offering her arm. "Dad would be so proud of you," she whispered. "Not because you became a doctor, but because you found the courage to face yourself." They began their walk down the aisle, past friends and colleagues who had witnessed their journey. Dr. Patel dabbed at her eyes in the second row. Claire, Sophia's friend from medical school, gave a subtle thumbs up. Thomas's eyes never left Sophia, his expression one of quiet wonder. At the altar, Margaret placed Sophia's hand in Thomas's, then stepped back to take her seat in the front row. As the ceremony proceeded, she noticed the simple platinum band Thomas slipped onto Sophia's finger. Nothing ostentatious, but solid and meaningful, much like the foundation they were building together. During the reception in the garden, Margaret found herself surrounded by an unexpected community. Eleanor and Richard included her in conversations, as if she'd always been part of their circle. Sophia's colleagues from the hospital treated her with newfound respect, several mentioning the nursing scholarship in her name. "Your daughter saved my son's life last month," a woman told Margaret as they stood by the cake table. 15 hours in surgery. She never gave up. "That sounds like her," Margaret replied with genuine pride. As evening fell, lanterns illuminated the garden paths. Margaret watched Thomas and Sophia share their first dance, their foreheads touching as they moved slowly to the music. When the song ended, Sophia made her way through the crowd to where Margaret sat. "Dance with me?" she asked, extending her hand. On the small dance floor, mother and daughter swayed together to a song that had played at Margaret and Robert's wedding decades earlier. Neither spoke. Words seemed inadequate for the journey they'd traveled. "I found something in Dad's papers," Sophia said finally. "A letter he wrote to me before he died, to be opened when I got married. He predicted this moment. You and me, healing whatever might have broken between us over the years." Margaret smiled through tears. "He always did know us both better than we knew ourselves." Later, as the celebration wound down, Margaret stood alone at the garden's edge, watching fireflies rise from the darkening grass. She felt a presence beside her and turned to find Thomas. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For not giving up on her. For showing me what real love looks like. Not just the easy kind, but the kind that endures through the hardest parts." He squeezed her hand briefly before returning to Sophia, who was saying goodbye to the last departing guests. As Margaret drove home to her quiet house, she felt not emptiness, but fullness, a life shaped by love in all its complicated forms. The wedding ring on her finger caught the streetlight as she turned the wheel, its familiar weight a reminder of promises kept and promises renewed. At home, she watered the yellow roses, now blooming extravagantly in the spring warmth. One perfect blossom had opened that morning. She cut it carefully and placed it in a small vase beside Robert's photograph. "We did it," she told him, touching the glass gently. She found her way back. Outside her window, the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. Margaret Wilson sat in her garden, a woman who had lost much but gained something precious in return, the knowledge that love, when true, can weather the most devastating storms and still emerge intact, perhaps stronger for having been tested. In the morning, Sophia would depart for her honeymoon, beginning a new chapter. But tonight, Margaret allowed herself to simply be a mother, a widow, a nurse, a woman who had discovered her own strength in the crucible of betrayal and forgiveness. The journey had changed them both, transforming pain into wisdom, wounds into scars that would always be tender but were no longer bleeding. And in that transformation lay the greatest gift of all, the understanding that true love isn't perfect, it's resilient. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel and don't miss the next video with more stories that will touch your heart.